Hello, my fellow Gentiles, and welcome to part 2 of my Honest Hearts review series. We've just entered Zion, and to say it's been a rocky start would be embarrassingly appropriate. Thankfully, what follows is pretty uphill for the most part, and it's not long before the player will be meeting the man himself, Joshua Graham. Joshua Graham is a fucking stellar character, and it only takes a handful of lines for him to grab one's attention. Knowing what we know about Joshua Graham, Caesar's Legion, and Legate Linnaeus from the base game, as well as what we've been told by Follows Chalk up to this point, one wouldn't be mistaken for thinking that the former Malpace Legate would be this absolute badass warrior of a character, and while he definitely is just that, the introduction to him as a person is somewhat surprising on a first playthrough.
I am a new Canaanite. We believe we are the heirs of a spiritual tradition given to our ancestors thousands of years ago. We have made and kept covenants with our Lord God to honor his laws. In exchange, we are promised eternal salvation after this life. A day will come when our Lord returns to judge us all. Until then, we must honor his laws and start others along the path of salvation if we can. That's why we trade with others and work the tribes. We have more than food and medicine to offer. Good news is our most valuable commodity. By the rivers of Babylon there we sat down. Yea, we wept, when we remembered Zion. Remember, O Lord, the children of Edom in the day of Jerusalem, who said, raise it even to the foundation. O daughter of Babylon, who ought to be destroyed, happy shall he be, that rewardeth thee as thou hast served us. Happy shall he be, that taketh and dasheth thy little ones against the stones. Do you know what it means?
I'm sure this is some sort of sin. Don't worry, God will forgive us.
Joshua Graham, the legendary burned man of the Mojave that the Legion refuses to utter the name of, the man no Frumentari has returned from, is in fact a good-hearted Bible thumper that merely wishes to live in peace, only killing in self-defense and looking after others. Talk about subversion of expectations. Though I have to admit that there is a certain irony to the fact that the guy who once helped lead a post-apocalyptic parody of the Roman Empire is now spreading the word of God to innocent and less developed tribes. Religion. Religion never changes. This opening dialogue with Joshua is spectacular because not only can the player respond to him a number of ways, but his responses are appropriate for his character. If the player is kind to Joshua, he'll reciprocate it in a way that's surprisingly gentle, and you can tell it's been a while since he's met someone outside the tribes of New Canaan that was so willing to help. If the player tells him to go fuck himself, he won't entirely reciprocate it, but he'll make it clear that he's unwilling to help the courier escape Zion. Joshua and the tribes have a lot on their plate, and they don't have time to help someone who won't do the same for them. He's not unreasonable about it, and it makes sense that he'd want to strike a deal with the courier given their predicament. It could be seen as opportunistic, but given the circumstances, I can't exactly blame him. Joshua and the dead horses, as well as the Sorrows and Daniel, have been backed into a corner by the Whitelegs, a tribe of what are essentially raiders with no real survival skills beyond combat and pillaging, a fact that the Legion has taken full advantage of. The Whitelegs are looking to be assimilated into the Legion, though their relationship with the Legion doesn't really get explored. What we do know is that they respect the Legion as the most powerful tribe east of Vegas, and the hunt for Joshua will land them a place amongst the football gear-sporting LARPers, should they manage to capture him. I think the Whitelegs are a well-established faction and they fit well into the story, but unlike the base game of New Vegas where everything was so morally gray and up for debate when it came time to pick sides, Honest Hearts feels very lacking in moral complexity, and it's not as if they didn't try. The main conflict of Honest Hearts is about whether the New Canaanites should abandon Zion or stand their ground against the Whitelegs. Peace is not an option, but pacifism is, and I think there's a nugget of complexity in this theme, but it doesn't feel fully fleshed out. Joshua, unsurprisingly, wants to stand his ground alongside the Sorrows and the Dead Horses and purge Zion of the Whitelegs once and for all. Given Joshua's past experiences, and the love he holds for New Canaan and the more innocent tribes, as well as just how straight up evil the Whitelegs are, his position makes sense, and siding with him doesn't feel very morally dubious even when he's executing the Whiteleg leader Salt Upon Wounds. Yeah, so there are definitely hints of the Malpais Legate that bubble up to the surface, but Joshua is still far from the monster of the East that is the Legate Linnaeus, and I won't condemn him for taking a bit of pleasure in finishing off the tribe that sought to murder both him and his fellow tribesmen after having burned his home to the ground. The other side of the coin is conveyed through Daniel, a new Canaanite who seeks to preserve the innocence of the dead horses and the sorrows by abandoning Zion alongside them. Daniel simply doesn't want to go to war, and he doesn't want to see any further bloodshed, and while I can very much sympathize with that, I mean, hey, it's war, what is it good for? He ultimately comes off as rather childish and almost willfully ignorant of the situation. Also, I just think it's funny that instead of coming up with a way of humanizing the Whitelegs, Obsidian opted entirely to play off the innocence of the sorrows and the dead horses. Really just goes to show how lacking this entire conflict is, but we'll get to that soon. Back to Daniel. I do think Daniel's heart is in the right place, and I think there is something to be said for the loss of innocence in a tribe that's managed for so long without being exposed to violence and conflict. I mean, 2 centuries is a long time to not have any conflict whatsoever. That's pretty impressive. But the hard truth is that the Sorrows can't avoid other factions until the end of time. Daniel's desire to avoid conflict is simply impossible to maintain forever. It's not a matter of if the Sorrows go to war with another tribe, it's a matter of when. If it's not the Whitelegs, it'll be some other tribe at some point. You just can't escape that. Once they abandon Zion, not only are they entering uncharted territory, but they remain in land primarily occupied by Caesar's legion. The legion will not show mercy on the Sorrows or the dead horses. If anything, Joshua Graham will always be a target on the backs of those tribes. And even beyond the Legion, this is a post-nuclear world. Raiders exist. Super mutants exist. Full-scale military organizations like the Brotherhood of Steel, the Enclave, and the New California Republic all exist. Daniel's desire to keep the Sorrows and dead horses from violence is a pipe dream that will only hinder them in the long run. Were it not for Joshua's leadership and teaching them in ways of self-defense, they would be captured and enslaved by the Legion in a matter of weeks following an exodus from Zion. Peace is not an option, and pacifism is far inferior to standing one's ground. Daniel is a good man, but he should never be put in a position of leadership above Joshua Graham. This conflict is just too black and white, and it's because of this that my investment in Honest Hearts so dimly pales in comparison to the passionate discussion that I could have over the war for New Vegas that occurs in the base game. Another point that Daniel doesn't even consider is what will happen to the Whitelegs should they fail to capture Joshua Graham. If they fail at their quest, Caesar will no doubt have them purged from the wasteland. Daniel claims to care even for the Whitelegs, but he comes off with about as much sincerity as a preacher saying, "Love the sinner, hate the sin." Daniel clearly does not care about the Whitelegs, but even that potential character trait is left unexplored. He's just so bland. But alright, that's enough about the destination. What about the journey itself? How good is the main quest of Honest Hearts? Well, it ain't very good. One might think that missions to do with the faction war would have to do with calculated assaults on bases of operation where the player can go at it guns blazing, or opt to take a stealthy approach. You could have some intense standoffs where every line of dialogue could be the difference between peace and war, so on and so forth. But as it turns out, Honest Hearts is primarily just fetch quests.
You know what?
You know, one of those things that the overwhelming majority of gamers hate, along with trailing missions and walking sections. I'm not gonna pretend that these are any more fun than they are, because, well, they're not. These missions desperately hinge on the map of Zion itself being relatively interesting to explore alongside Follow's Chalk and Waking Cloud of the Dead Horses and Sorrows respectively. Now I'll be the first to say, although some lines are heard a bit too much more than others,
Bet they don't have anything as nasty as Yao Guai out where you come from, huh?
Fuck off out there, will you?
it is enjoyable to learn about Zion from these companions, and the map itself has some very good points going for it, but none of that really contributes to the main story. At least not very significantly. I love the story of the lone Zion Ranger, but the main quest is just so lacking in comparison to Dead Money. Dead Money may have had the player going a bit back and forth, but there was always a point to each of the objectives, and there were loads of smaller decisions that would add up both narratively and gameplay-wise. Here in Zion, it's literally just getting items that you'll never make use of again because they're not even real items. They're just key items that only exist to take up space in your miscellaneous tab until the quest is complete. There's an optional objective where the player can basically sack a white leg camp, but that's a single optional encounter that doesn't even last that long, and it doesn't have any notable consequences. What's worse is that most other combat encounters just seem to occur at random. Sometimes you'll just stumble across a band of white legs and that'll be that. You just kill them and then you go about your day. They don't even offer up any new items or gear aside from a small handful that more or less function the same as many other archetypal gear found in the base game.
It's fucking...
Something else I find utterly baffling is just how lacking this expansion is with its endings. Dead Money had loads of variables with its ending, with each character having multiple possible conclusions to their stories and even a couple of obscure endings. The number of endings to be seen in Honest Hearts, however, can be counted with one hand, and there are very few variables that lead to different slides for the same ending. When it comes down to it, there are basically 3 endings. Fight back against the White Legs, help the Sorrows and Dead Horses retreat from Zion, or just commit genocide. As for the ending variables, there are a number of them that can lead to different slides and narrations in Honest Heart's epilogue, but calling them different feels really generous. There are about 2 to 5 different slides that play out for the various tribes and characters, and they're about what you would expect. The White Legs have about 5 possible ending slides, but literally all of them see the White Legs either being disbanded or wiped out. With the new Canaanites evacuated, the White Legs don't get assimilated into the Legion. If you fight back, they die off. One thing that really surprised me, though, was just how dark the writers seemed to think Joshua killing Salt Upon Wounds really is. Letting Joshua execute him is played up as this horrific act of evil that scars every tribe involved, and it's described multiple times as Joshua's darkest hour. It's honestly way too hyperbolic, and it completely ignores the fact that up to this point, Salt Upon Wounds has been established as this unforgivable monster. And it's not just the player only getting to see one side of it or something like that. We know that he has butchered, pillaged, and raped, and that he is dead set on being assimilated into Caesar's legion. So, forgive me if I'm not shedding a tear when this terrible person is finally seeing their past deeds catch up to them. It would have been one thing if, upon meeting him, he turned out to be completely unlike what he's been described as, with all of the legends surrounding him merely being hearsay. But no, he's just some shithead with a gun to his head who doesn't want to die. Quite frankly, I don't really know that many people who are keen on being executed, so yeah, I'm not really feeling sorry for the guy. On a positive note, though, I appreciate the endings for both Waking Cloud and Follows Chalk. At some point during the courier's travels with Follows Chalk, he'll ask if seeing the outside world beyond Zion is worth it, to which the courier can either encourage or discourage him from leaving to go out and explore. Neither of his endings are made out to be good or bad, though there are potential pros and cons implied for both equally, and it was a nice way to round out his character. Waking Cloud's story has to do with the loss of her husband and the revelation that Daniel was keeping his death hidden from her. The courier can either convince Waking Cloud that Daniel and the Sorrows were only doing what they thought was right for her, or the courier can take her side and enable her bitterness. I can absolutely understand Waking Cloud's bitterness towards Daniel, but given that I'm above the age of 12, I don't really see much of a reason to make things worse between her and the Sorrows. Daniel meant well and just didn't know how to break the news to her, and I think that's something that anyone can sympathize with. I mean, really, who wants to tell a loved one that another loved one has died? Daniel's just a preacher, he's no soldier, and his position of influence over the Sorrows is a whole new world for him, so it makes sense that he would struggle with these kinds of dilemmas. But even though I feel this decision is pretty black and white, the story itself is really good. It was also interesting to see the Happy Trails caravan get their own ending slides. 2 of the 3 endings see the company finding success with the new Canaanites, but there are definitely some hurdles they have to overcome if the tribes have evacuated Zion. The last ending slide for the Happy Trails Caravan Company is essentially what happens if the courier decides to commit genocide on everyone in Zion. The Caravan Company abandons Zion and goes belly up. It does feel cut off from the main story, given that the player's interactions with Happy Trails is locked to the opening minutes of the DLC. But I will say that I still appreciate that Obsidian wanted to give the group its own set of endings, regardless of how minor their involvement in the story truly was. However, there is one last, very critical flaw that does not sit well with me at all. Siding with either Joshua to wipe out the Whitelegs, or siding with Daniel and evacuating Zion, basically has no real consequences. If the courier sides with Joshua and wipes out the Whitelegs, Daniel's like, no, that's totally sucks. Okay, let's go do it. And if they side with Daniel and choose to retreat, Joshua's just kinda like, whatever. Hell, if the player straight up ignores the optional objectives in Daniel's Exodus quest, he'll be like, you didn't help anyone, they're gonna die. And then he just kind of shrugs it off and gives the player the map so that they can leave. Like, seriously? Alright, so I'm willing to buy that either of them can be convinced to go with the other, but to do it so easily is just bafflingly uncharacteristic both of these characters and of New Vegas in general. In the base game, nothing is this simple, and there were some options the courier simply was not allowed. Take Mr. House and the Brotherhood of Steel, for instance. As many of you know, there was a plan for there to be content that allowed the player to convince House to spare the Brotherhood and form an alliance with them. However, for one reason or another, the content never made it into the final game. So as it stands, Mr. House refuses to align with the Brotherhood because he believes they are not a group that can be trusted, and they simply do not fit his mold of a future society. You might think that that sounds a bit ridiculous coming from the guy resting on the backs of tribes that engage in cannibalism, impersonate Elvis Presley, and a bunch of straight up sexual deviants that are definitely not involved in any kind of human trafficking whatsoever, totally. But the thing to remember is that Mr. House has leverage over those tribes, and he knows that he can coerce them into obeying the laws of New Vegas should they ever step out of line. House is not about to make a bet that he doesn't hold all the cards for, and this is something that he's managed to do with every other tribe around New Vegas for the past 2+ centuries. The NCR is also extremely hesitant to align with the Brotherhood after their tango at Operation Sunburst, but it's actually possible to broker a truce between the two factions so long as a number of requirements have been met. I actually failed in a recent playthrough because I got Hardin in the position of Elder above McNamara. Hardin was willing to open the bunker to the outside world, and he seemed like a decent option to push the Brotherhood forward. McNamara, on the other hand, straight up acknowledges that his devout following of the Brotherhood code will lead to the death of the Mojave chapter, but he still follows the code regardless. So in my head, I was like, well, obviously Hardin will be more willing to align with the NCR, but that was my mistake for not realizing just how militant and how proud Hardin is. McNamara may be devout, but he's not opposed to an NCR alliance at a personal level. It's surprising how easy it is to make this truce a lost cause, and it helps to add to the depth of the conflict between these two factions. Honest Hearts completely lacks this kind of complexity, and it really detracts from how invested a player can potentially be in the story. After all this playtime of mine and having read every damn piece of lore that I can find, including content that didn't make it into the final cut of the game, I have surprisingly little that I can honestly tell you about the Whitelegs, the dead horses, and the sorrows beyond what is presented at face value. It's a shame that the story of Honest Hearts is so lacking because I really think that Obsidian had a lot to work with here. You have Joshua Graham, one of the best and most interesting characters in the entire game, a tribal war where two of the tribes are quite innocent-minded, and the other is battle-hardened by its association with Caesar's Legion, and not to mention a setting that is completely new and unique to the world of Fallout. Honest Hearts could have been one hell of a story, but it's just so black and white that I can't help but wonder how things managed to become so simple. I get that Obsidian didn't have a lot of time with this DLC, but we got what we got, and what we got just don't got it. You get me? But I suppose that's all I have for today. I hope you all have been enjoying this series so far and are looking forward to part 3, where I'll be covering the general gameplay. I'll see you guys later. Have a blessed day.